In a very distant future, a house of people called the Harkonnens is ravaging the sands of the planet Arrakis. Stealing the spices from the rich planet, the house is more wealthy than even the Emperor himself. The locals have been trying to fight back for their own planet for decades, until one day the Emperor just decided to rid the land of the Harkonnens, but his reasons remain a mystery. Make sure you follow the story and stay for Dune Part 2 in the next video. We're in the year 10,191. A young man wakes up after experiencing visions. We are on the planet Caladan, home of the House of Atreides. While eating breakfast, Paul's mother tells him to get ready for an official ceremony. As a test of skill, she asks him to use the voice, a form of mind control to command people. Now for context, the reason why spice is so important is that it allows for space travel to be possible. It is used for safe passage and navigation within space, and therefore it is the most precious substance in the universe. The ceremony arrives, and an Imperial convoy lands on House Atreides' doorstep. They ask the house to take control of Arrakis and bring stability to it, and without hesitation, the Duke of the House, Paul's father, accepts. Later on, an Air Force pilot, Duncan, is doing a test run. Paul greets his friend and asks him to go along with him to Arrakis. He explains that he's been having visions about the planet, and he saw Duncan with the Fremen natives, but he was dead. Duncan doesn't have that type of authority and turns his offer down. Still wanting to find a way, Paul later meets his father to ask him to join the convoy, but he's not allowed as his father seems to be overly protective of his son. The Duke explains that the Emperor probably took Arrakis from the Harkonnens and gave it to them to create a war between both houses that might rival his power. The goal was to weaken both teams. Paul is doubtful about his future role in leading the house, but his father reassures him that a great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. Paul gets to training with Gurney, the army commander of the house. They wield some kind of electronic shields that repel the attacks. After getting bested, Paul with some attitude explains that he is not in the mood, which angers Gurney. He explains to Paul that the Harkonnens are not human. For 80 years they owned Arrakis and owned the spice fields. They are brutal people and he will have to be ready when he faces them. On the other side, in Gate D Prime, home of House Harkonnen, Rabban meets his uncle Lord Baron and is furious that the Emperor just took everything that they built. Back on Caladan, cloaked figures eerily arrive at the House of Atreides. Paul's mom wakes him up and it appears that she snitched on the dreams and visions he's been having. A doctor examines him and warns him of the Gesserits. In a scene straight out of Silent Hill, Paul goes to meet the Gesserits. The Reverend Mother uses the voice on him and orders him to place his hand inside a torture box. If he removes it, he dies. He begins feeling excruciating pain, but he takes it like a man before they start seeing visions. After it's done, the Reverend Mother explains that it was a test, as the boy possesses too much power to be allowed to live if he couldn't control his impulses. His mom, Jessica, gave him the powers and has been training him. Paul tells her about the dreams he's been having before they leave. Jessica asks the mother if her son is the one, but she seems doubtful. Paul asks his mother about the prophecy and she explains that the Bene Gesserit serve as powerful partners of the great houses. They influence politics and are incredibly dangerous. The one is a person with a great mind who will bridge the past, present, and future all together and create a better life for all. The next day, we watch as a gigantic ship rises out of the water. Paul observes from afar as the ships begin to depart for Arrakis. The entire house arrives later, and as they disembark their ships, they hear the people chant Lisan al-Gaib. Jessica later explains that it means Messiah. As we get to the city, we see that it's surrounded by a huge wall that protects the city from storms and any worms. The planet has 2 moons, with a big one called the Hand of God. The city is awfully quiet, which troubles the commanders. They express the need to protect the refinery and factory for the spice trade, which is the main reason why they're there. Jessica chooses her personal servant and chooses one based on her name. The servant presents her with a gift meant for the one, a special blade of some sort. Later on, the people of Arrakis continue to call for Paul, believing he's their Messiah. He checks out a museum and learns about gigantic sandworms that reside within the sands of the planet. Back in his room, he learns more about rhythmic movement to steer clear of the worms. All of a sudden, a droid enters the room and begins to look for him. He's cautious, but it finally spots him and goes to attack, and he manages to catch it with his hands. It is a hunter-seeker and the owner must be nearby. They find his body embedded inside the walls and was placed there 6 weeks ago. The Duke is furious about the attempt on his son's life. Back on the Harkonnens' home planet, they meet with the Reverend Mother, who is cutting a deal with them. She backstabbed the Atreides family but tries to spare Jessica and Paul, and she's given the Lord's word. He's lying though, as he has no intentions of leaving any Atreides alive. In a strategy meeting, it is revealed that the Harkonnens were making 10 billion a year from the spice trade. Unfortunately, the Atreides won't be making anywhere near that with the equipment that was left for them. They plan to investigate the issue, and Duncan arrives back to report on his findings about the Fremen, whom he's lived with for weeks. He wants to arrange a meeting between them and reveals that there are millions of Fremen as opposed to the suspected 50,000 that the Harkonnens believed. They are smart and ferocious warriors. One of the Fremen leaders enters the meeting and immediately spits on the floor. Before things can escalate, Duncan explains that it's a welcoming gesture in their culture, and spits back at him, before the Duke repays the favor. The leader isn't interested in a deal, but the Duke promises him that the Fremen will be safe under his rule and won't be hunted. As he's leaving, he recognizes Paul somehow. Later, Duncan gives Paul a gift he got from the Fremen people, a compass. It appears that Duncan really admires and respects these people. Before they set out to investigate, a scientist checks their suits and explains how they operate. She assumes that Paul has worn it before, but he denies it, and she recites the prophecy again, which says that the one will know their ways as if he's lived with them. They're taken to the spice sands and one of the miners. There are air drones in the air surveilling for worms, and it reports that a worm is coming for the miner. They rush to rescue its crew, but Paul falls to his knees before Gertie retrieves him. They barely make it back on board before the miner is swallowed whole by the worm. The crew is safe, but the Duke scolds his own son. Back at the palace, the doctor checks on Paul and explains that spice is a psychoactive chemical, and he seems to be sensitive. Paul is sure that this was not an allergic reaction and explains that he had a vision and saw a girl. It wasn't clear what the vision told him, but he knows that his mom is pregnant, something that she herself wasn't even sure of. On Seleucus Secondos, the Imperial Army planet, a dystopian army is prepping for war. Alongside the Harkonnens, the Imperials are also making a move on the Atreides house, supplying 3 battalions in a plot against them. Back in Arrakis, Paul is given pills, and so are his parents, but they don't take them. In the middle of the night, the guards are suddenly shot down. The Duke notices that something is wrong and finds a body while security is unresponsive. He's shot from behind, and all of a sudden they are under attack. The Atreides try to defend, but they are taken by surprise and all of their vehicles and equipment are destroyed. They resort to fighting on foot. They try to fend off an attack, but are overwhelmed and surrounded by the 2 forces against them. It turns out that the doctor was a traitor and was forced to drug them to save his wife. He gives the Duke a chance to kill his captives by giving him a tooth with poison gas inside it. All he needs to do is bite down on it. The Atreides forces are executed one by one, and Duncan takes out a few enemy soldiers. He can't find Paul, who's been taken alongside his mother to be dropped in the desert to die. As they leave, the place gets blown to bits. Duncan kills more troops and steals a plane to escape. Paul tries to remove his mother's gag using the voice, so she in turn can use her voice to command their captors, but he fails. He tries it one more time and succeeds. As soon as Jessica's gag is off, she takes care of the rest, causing the captors to kill each other. They escape and look at the wake of destruction that was once theirs. Meanwhile, the Duke wakes up late in front of the Lord. Paul and Jessica find a distress kit. The doctor gets killed by the Lord and the Duke manages to poison the air around him and kill pretty much everyone standing in the room. Paul retrieves his father's ring from their palace, while the scientist, who was originally sent by the Emperor, observes the aftermath. Duncan confronts her about her involvement, but she denies having known anything about what happened. The Lord is still alive somehow, but barely. Paul is back in a tent having visions of the same girl, but this time it looks like there is a war and he's fighting in it. A great war is coming, and he begins panicking before lashing out at his mother. They get out of hiding the next morning, and they are found by Duncan. Paul is now the Duke of the house. As a storm will hit soon, everyone hurries to take shelter. They're taken to the Fremen, and Paul wants to unite all houses and wage an all-out war against the Emperor. They are suddenly under attack, but the first wave is taken out by traps. Another attack rolls in, and this time, Duncan sacrifices himself to take out as many enemies as he can to protect Paul and Jessica. He is defiant even in death, as he rises again to kill more before he's finally killed. They escape with the Fremen scientists and split up, where they get on a helicopter and flee. The scientist signals for Worms to arrive but is unceremoniously stabbed in the back. Before she is dead, the worm arrives and swallows them all up. Paul and Jessica are not in the clear just yet, as there are jets behind them and a sandstorm that they fly into, where Paul has visions to make matters worse. Back in the house of Harkonnens, the Lord is healing and informed that nothing survives the storms, so they must be dead. Rabban is ordered to resume the spice trade and kill all the Fremen. Paul survives the storm somehow but crashes into the desert, and they make a run to the rocks and gear up for the troubles ahead. They set out to find the Fremen, and Paul continues to see visions of the girl. They find a place where they believe they'll find them and try to blend in from afar by emulating their walk. Unfortunately, a worm chases them and stares them right in the face before it is called away by someone else and saves them. Paul recognizes that they're not alone and they're suddenly surrounded by a whole group of Fremens. He recognizes the leader from before, who tells them that they can take the boy in, but they won't take the mother. A fight breaks out and Jessica puts a blade to his throat. Impressed by her skills, he accepts her as well. Now we finally see the girl from Paul's visions. Suddenly, one of the people decides to challenge them and issue a trial by combat. Not the best time, Jameis. Paul acts as his mother's champion and sees visions of his death. He's given a Chris knife by the girl, another thing from his visions. Jameis, the elite fighter, takes on the boy. The boy busts him out of the blue, but there is no yielding over here. It's a fight to the death. Paul busts him again, but he's never killed a man before. But now he has. He's congratulated by all the people for his victory, but he already feels remorse for what he's done. By law, he's accepted as one of them now. Paul is adamant that his journey leads through the desert. They march on, but this is only the beginning. This was a hell of a ride. The movie left us craving for the next part to find out just what exactly happens in this story. Although it did feel more like a trailer of a movie for the next part, it was necessary, as after all that we are still not sure of what is happening. If you enjoyed this movie, make sure to complete the story and watch part 2 through the link in the description below. Well, this brings us to the end of today's video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel to get more videos like this one. Your support helps us grow. And tell me what you think about this film. Were you able to keep up with all the different factions, planets, and houses? Are you looking forward to part 2 and finally completing the story? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them. And if you're watching till now, thank you. I'll see you in another video soon.